The Powers Project.
Carl,
Back again.
back again.
You keep asking me for these really hard topics and stuff.
I know. Seriously, I'm going to have to call this the Carl and Kurt show.
Kurt and Carl. Kurt and Carl.
Okay.
The Power Show with Carl. Something like that. No, got to keep the logo going. The nomenclature's already out there.
To me, it's just such a blessing to have someone like you who
Thank you.
Who I know that we can talk about these topics in depth and be intelligent about it.
We'll try, that's for sure. And I think I want to say for your listeners again, in case they're going, who is this guy Wasker? I am a professor of history at Valencia College. I've been teaching at that school for 20 years. Doesn't mean that I necessarily know more than anybody else, but the material that usually I come and talk to you about has a historical connection from which I've been teaching and talking to people for really more like 30, 35 years. So again, doesn't make me necessarily more knowledgeable than anyone else, but I'm not just your random friend off the street kind of a thing. So in case anybody's wondering.
Yeah, it's not like I just pulled someone out of the air and said, "Hey, let's talk about something historical," even though you don't know anything about history. So no, and that's what I love about you, is that you bring this insight and in particular and put it in context with history. And I think that's such an important thing to do, because oftentimes when people are having these conversations, they aren't putting them in historical context, and so they're comparing things that shouldn't be compared, and at least because it doesn't do it justice.
Well, and you don't understand it. Often a person will lack a depth in their understanding,
right?
Because they won't have or won't include the context. Usually, they won't have the context. They won't be able to see it. And again, largely, I'd say because I've been teaching it and I've been in love with history literally all my life. I see things, and I guess we could say almost a longitudinal view. So it's like this thing we're talking about. It's like, oh, in the 1300s, and for a lot of people, be like, that's 600 years ago. Who cares? But it's like, no. Actually, it matters. It matters.
Right.
It's to some degree a butterfly effect, but it does impact and set in stage, decisions that then layer and stack. That doesn't mean we're bound by those things. I don't believe in a kind of a deterministic kind of position that we're trapped. It should guide us into saying, okay, now that I know this context, how am I going to vote? How am I going to think for myself? And we certainly have the right, as any other people living, on the planet for the 6,500 or so years that humans have lived, that we're aware of from a historical point of view. We can conclude what we want to conclude. There's nothing stopping us. And we shouldn't feel like, oh, well, history said this, so I'm trapped. It's like, no. We can go where we want to go. But just history gives us that context. And often what we'll find is what we're thinking is novel to us has actually been tried before. And so then there's lessons you can take from there. So,
right.
Anyway.
I often call you in my introductions a historian. Now, I know because of your modesty, you don't really refer to yourself as such, but I think that's an accurate title. That
Yeah,
yes,
I think it's fair. Yes, there are. There's like in many areas of fields, there probably are within that field a sense of maybe the elite who do something, and then others who are practitioners, and then others who are advocates, and some who have it as a hobby. And what terms you use to describe probably can be applied to all, but then sometimes we go, oh no, well the elite gets this title, kind of a thing. But yes, I think I fulfill the role of a historian, and that's certainly what I try to go out to do.
Well, I consider you an elite.
Well, thank you so much.
All right, so today's topic, oh man,
now calm yourself.
I know.
Calm yourself.
I really want to talk about SCOTUS right now, but we're going to stick to what we had talked about because of what happened in the past week, and that is this country on the precipice of a civil war? And you, when I asked you this, you said, I believe we're already there. So I would love for you to explain what you meant by
Oh, wow. How much time do we have? You weren't supposed to give that away yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's fair. It's fair. So when I told you that, as I mentioned, kind of rolling a hypothesis in my head about what is the status. And for your listeners' sake, you still have my book over here about the patterns of history. I've been thinking about this. In one sense, I'd say for the past, since the brouhaha around President Bush coming out of the invasion and then moving into the '08 election, so the economic crisis, and you start going, wow, what's going on? And so then you just start pondering and thinking, not so much like end of the world scenarios or end of time scenarios, but just kind of like, well, what are the likely outcomes? And again, thinking, as we were just saying, in terms of historical context. And I'm going to pause there for a second, in parentheses. I try to really detach myself from having an opinion when I'm doing this and just think, like the Marvel, the Watchers, right? I'm just watching and going, okay, where's this going to go? Not like I have a vested interest in where I want it to go. And so when you start walking down that road, you start thinking, okay. Then having an opinion, I start thinking, well, I think this, that, or the other like needs to change or has gone wrong. When we did our thing on the gun violence, we really delved into what I believe is a cultural change that has been very detrimental for us since at least the mid-'70s.
Absolutely.
So then I'm thinking, well, how could you fix that? And so that's kind of both detached and now I'm more involved and thinking in those terms. And so in the idea of a great cycle of crisis, our U.S. Civil War, so 1861 to 1865, and the Great Crisis cycle is really the 1850s into Reconstruction, so 1870s. So it's always about a 20-year window block, just so everybody knows. That looms large in everybody's mind. So they hear Civil War, they think of that. And so it's easy to then say, if someone says, oh, I think that we're in a Civil War, well, no, there's no armies marching around. There's no states that have openly seceded, that kind of thing. So that's silly talk. Or there could be, but that's dumb because of the way the military, which I think we're going to talk about that as we go along. Mm-hmm. But I started thinking, probably this year even, well, what exactly is a Civil War? And it's a war within the, say, civic society. And we use the war, I think the way Hobbes uses the way, I think we can use the word war like Hobbes uses the word war when he talks about the relationship between humans, that what exists between humans is a state of war, meaning a state of conflict where two individuals want diametrically opposed things that will cause them to kind of butt heads with each other. It doesn't have to mean violence or armies marching around. It's just a sense of what two people who should be, we would say, civil to each other, they're not civil, they're in civil war with each other. And when I'm telling this to my students, I always joke, and I go, you understand what he means because you've all been to middle school. And jokingly thinking about what happens for adolescents and how middle school is often handled or experienced by a lot of people, kind of a harshness, a crudeness, as you're learning as a young, 12, 13, 14-year-old, the use of your tongue, the use of your wit, and how you realize, I can harm somebody emotionally, and you see that. Some people like that. That whole thing we've all seen a bunch of TV shows and stuff like that. But that's the status where Hobbes is talking about war. When you look at the Great Crisis history, when those happen, what is going on, as I think I've said on your show before, is a philosophical divide between the civic society, usually into two sides. In fact, I don't think it's ever been more than two sides, but there are sometimes 3 points of view with a moderate and a middle point of view. And so what is happening could be described, though we don't use this term, every time as a civil war. So now this is me just thinking even recently going, okay, I do talk about the American Revolution as a civil war. That's exactly what it was. The Glorious Revolution, which preceded it, and the crisis before that, I think it is a civil war in the sense that same idea, the citizens of the place are at deep odds with each other. Now, it's also, at that moment, we call that the bloodless revolution because there was no actual war, and there was a technical English Civil War 40 years before, which is not to get lost in English history. So when I look at that and I think about, particularly on the hindsight of some of the recent Supreme Court decisions, the increased sense of frustration I started listing things with my wife the other day. I won't be able to get the whole list out here, but war in Ukraine, inflation, supply chain issues, a segment of the society believing the president's not legitimate, which has been the case since the year 2000. So from the 2000 election on, maybe not so much in 04 or in 12, but in 00, in 08, in 16, and 20, every one of those presidents, our last four presidents, has had a large sector of society that, I mean, I would be willing to say upwards of 40%, who think that they are illegitimate. Like they're not really the president. So it's one thing to think, I've got a president of the opposition party who I don't like. It's another thing to think, I don't like, but they won the election. It's another thing to think, that guy cheated. That guy's not supposed to be there. And so then you tell yourself for the 4 years that I'm not going to have to listen to anything you say. And I want my party leaders to openly oppose him. I want them to stop anything this cheater tries to do. And so, wait a minute, you're saying for the past now 22 years, there's segments of our population that think the presidents have been illegitimate. So you add all those things in, the inflation crisis, obviously the gas prices being a minor piece of that, and the people's responses to those things. I came home like a day or two after the Roe v. Wade decision, and my wife I'm so tired. And I'm like, she's a nurse, so yeah, right. No. I'm tired of reading in my Facebook feed.
Oh, yeah.
Both my conservative and my liberal friends posting versions of, if you think X, we can't be friends. Or if you don't think X, we can't be friends, kind of a thing. And so that's kind of where I was thinking. I think I'm not sure still if it's a hypothesis that I should say this is what's happening, but it feels like it. What I've said since we went into the pandemic, that is the beginning of our great crisis. The intensity of our great crisis starts right there.
Okay, so
the sense of we are now at deep odds with each other.
Okay, so as you pointed out, we've been at deep odds with each other for a while now. So what do you think was the catalyst? What was it? The 2000 election? Was it before that? Was it after that?
Well, I think it goes back to the philosophical divide, because when you look at any of the great crisis moments, I think it's fair to say, well, why? Like, it didn't have to end. Like, if you and I were playing a video game, you would think there's branches of this road between here and this conclusion where I could have avoided that crisis. So then we have to say, well, what led to the moment? And the moment, again, every time, which I think this is missing, is one of the things I'm kind of proudest about with my book, was that I said, okay, I think nobody else is saying this. It's easy to say in 1686, the Whigs just hated the new king and decided at that moment the king is a threat to us. Or it's easy to say in 1773, after the coercive acts, we're out, this is the king's a threat to us. But that doesn't make sense the way humans operate, to me. And you have to, it's like there's almost always a slow boil building. Well, then about what? Because King James II wasn't the king. The coercive acts, there had been 3 years of silence, is the way I describe it to my students, between 1770 and 1773. So 3 real years. And again, listeners have to remind yourself, 24-hour days, 7-day weeks, plenty of time for everybody to just chill out. Nobody be angry. Everything in life feeling normal, like pre-Stamp Act normal. And then the T Act happens in 73, which led to the tension, right? But so it's like, wait a minute, that's not enough to cause that. And what I'm suggesting is that no, there is this deepening philosophical divide between the sides that becomes almost kind of a tit for tat kind of thing, that as the next thing happens, I remember the last thing you did, and my animosity or my lack of care for you as a human grows. And as the philosophical divide continues, you get to this place where both sides feel hell-bent for leather, that they are defending a way of life, not just differing on a policy issue. And in that defending of a way of life, as you and I've talked about this before, you see them begin to other that crowd. They're no longer people, they're those people, or they're other. And you start hearing the evil word thrown around, which you didn't hear that under Bush. I mean, there were things, we shouldn't have invaded, that was evil, or about Obama, but you didn't really hear that, the evil word. In my opinion, I'm trying to think back, maybe there was some, but until 16. Not saying it's about Trump, but you have this building up. And again, historically, there's only a few things worldwide we can say everybody agrees to. This is one of those. Worldwide, every society historically has always agreed you banish or destroy evil. So if you now have labeled half of the population as evil, there's no way forward from that except into the clash and the contest.
Okay, so let's take a look at that for a second, because I would push back a little. I think I remember the first time where evil was thrown around quite flippantly, and that was during Reagan when he was describing,
Yeah, the evil empire.
right, the evil empire, and of course we're talking about Russia, and we're talking about or the USSR, and and his push to get rid of communism, basically, because it was evil, and I get that. Then we go to, I don't remember Clinton saying anything about evil, but obviously we get to Bush, and because of 9/11, there was evil again that rose up, and we
The
had
axis of evil.
Right,
Was the word he
right,
used,
exactly.
which he kind of looped in that World War II word. Remember, that's
Right,
the title of
yes.
the bad guys.
Yes, exactly. So we had to destroy evil again, and then
But notice that's always, both those examples are us Americans united,
right.
versus
That's
them.
the point I'm getting ready to make. So you're right. So in both cases, those were us against them. Then all of a sudden, when communism, when Russia collapsed and it fell apart, we didn't have to fight them anymore because we had won. Supposedly that was the thing. And then also when we went in and invaded Iraq, even though that wasn't what our goal was. Again, we had won, but it was them, us against them, and whoever's harboring, these people, Bin Laden, and so what happened was, and from what I can tell, is that again, as Matt Taibbi says in his book Hate Inc., we needed a new enemy,
Okay.
and that enemy was created by media to push us against each other. Now, during Bush's, was it his first or second? I don't remember, when he started pushing the Marriage Defensive Act that he was.
I don't remember either.
I want to say it was the second, but don't hold me to that. I'm not absolutely positive. In fact, now I think about it, it was the first. So now we have this whole, this issue about gay marriage and people who think marriage should be between a man and a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So now there's this divide between the country of morality, of who's right and who's wrong.
But remember, that goes back to the 80s as well. So it's that emerges at the time, not the specifics of gay marriage, because
Right.
nobody suggested that.
Right.
But the idea that there is a moral fight happening was what led to, was a key point, I guess I should say, or a key part of Reagan's election strategy, the moral majority, that whole thing that existed at that time, kind of rallying people.
And saying that AIDS was God's way of killing gay people.
Well,
I
think that's the secondary point. What was stated was the country has been taken off course, and we need to get it. We need to get it back on course.
All right, so I would point to the catalyst, or the starting point of this civil divide, if you will, during the Reagan
Yes, because that's
presidency.
the period of the unraveling.
Right, exactly. And I think that's where it started from, and it's
Sure.
just gotten worse over the years. I don't remember this happening, even with Nixon. See, here's
Well, no, because he's in the spiritual high.
right.
Nixon, even though we would say, wait, what? I mean, remember the pattern is 80-ish years, and at broad sweeps, 20-ish year sections from emerging from the last crisis. So everybody's happy. So that's known as the high, the first phase. The set meaning high, like we're all happy, we're united together. So part two, and I when I've been teaching this recently, I use seasons. So if you think of that being like spring, and we don't really have it here in Florida, but anybody who lives north
Right.
of us, your listeners, you've got the spring and things come to life, and there's happiness and butterflies and bees and yay, right? Then the second phase is the spiritual awakening, and the spiritual awakenings are on their own 80-year pattern. They happen off 40 years, right? So the spiritual awakening becomes really important because because things are so good for us as a civic group and we're united and we're happy, people then begin to think in spiritual terms, begin to think in kind of interpersonal terms and kind of evaluating their lives. And there begins to be both a pursuit of a new level or new sense or new type of spirituality and the beginnings of questioning the previous 80-year pattern's stance. Out of those two, that first 40 years, then you slide into what they call, Strauss and Howe called the unraveling. So fall, so spring, summer, fall, where things start falling off, things start falling apart, things are going down, people are going into hibernation, the beginnings of all those kinds of things. And so it is in the unraveling that you're moving towards what they call the fourth turning, or I just loosely call the crisis period. So another way to think about it is, in one sense, the pattern as we can see it now, and it's about, again, it's just so everybody remembers, it's like a 600-year-old thing. So there was a period before Anglo-American history, other Roman, Chinese, I think Mayan historians also talked in pattern terms, but we wouldn't want to apply what I just said like to previous ones because this is in this tight little window. But from the moment we win the previous crisis or we survive it and come out of it, you're on a line that's moving downwards, not quite fair, but it is in a sense of saying, oh, so we're eventually still heading to this place where we're not going to agree with each other.
Right. And see, up until the Reagan era, my point was going to be is like even with Nixon and Watergate, even the Republicans said, "Oh, you know what? You messed up. You were wrong, and you have to be punished for this." So there was an agreement from both sides. When we see Clinton, where he did something which was impeachable, he lied to the American people, he lied to Congress, and yet didn't. But what happened there is that you saw what happened in the Reagan era. They started making excuses, and instead of saying, "Oh, like with Reagan and Iran-Contra," thank you, and going, "Hey, that was wrong.
Yeah,
he needs to be ousted." They made excuses. They lied. They covered it up. They did everything that they could. Clinton went on to do it. George Bush went on to do it. To start a war with a country which we had never done before. And an illegal war, and I'm going to say this, if we weren't the United States of America, both Bush and Cheney would have been found guilty of war crimes.
There are people who think that.
Yeah, I'm one of them. They are war criminals. You
Yep.
don't invade a country without a reason to do so, other than the fact that you just feel like you can do whatever you want. Now, and I'm sure many people could say that about Putin right now, for that matter. So what we see is this divide, because now we see sides that are willing to ignore the truth and ignore the facts because it's their side. And it's almost as if these sides have become like sports teams.
Yeah.
It's like when the Patriots and Tom Brady, and they had that the football inflate gate or whatever, deflate gate or whatever it was, and Patriots fans were like, "Oh, you're crazy." They didn't care if it happened or not because it was their team. Sure. And they justified cheating or whatever. And I don't even know if it actually happened or not because they didn't care enough to follow it through. But this is how we've become. And then what happens is we have people like Karl Rove who are just outright liars and willing to do anything to win. They don't care what that means. They will do whatever it takes to win. And then we have a president like Trump who's the same way. I will do whatever it takes to win because he's a businessman. He doesn't care about what's right or wrong. He cares about winning. And as long as he wins, he feels then it's justified. So we've gotten to this point where there's such a divide that now even the Supreme Court is doing the same thing. I get that, all Supreme Court justices have their own ideologies. They have their own beliefs. But for the most part, from what I can see, throughout most of our history, not all, because as we could talk about if we do an episode about it, that there have been times where the Supreme Court went against the will of the people. And this is what this Supreme Court is doing.
Well, you have to get into the idea, what is an independent judiciary? And then that also dovetails into, are we a democracy, not a democracy? But, do we expect the judiciary to do the will of the people, or do we expect the judiciary to do
I think
well by the law?
Right. Well, I think that they have to do the will of the people, because the laws will change, as you said. It's fluid, and we will see laws change. It's like it wasn't that long ago. It's 2002 or 2003 when having gay sex was against the law. You could be arrested.
Yeah.
And here we have Clarence Thomas, 20 years later, trying to reinstate that. Of course, Clarence, you didn't say anything about interracial marriage because you're married to someone who isn't black, but I guess that's okay, because I guess in your world, whatever you do is okay by your God, but everything else is a sin.
But see, just that sense of the tension that you're feeling right now, and the timing of it, all fits into the point that I'm more largely making. That the Supreme Court has made controversial decisions throughout its entire lifetime, for 240 years or whatever. But we feel them intensely at this moment when we feel the existential threat.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's just the existential threat. If you did something look, if something went against what I believe is right, but by law you were on the right side of law, you were on the right side of history, you're on the right side of the people of the country, then I'd go, okay, I get it. I don't like it, but it is what it is. But when you have people like Clarence Thomas, who is corrupt, and his wife was part of the insurrection, and he refuses to recuse himself from that, that's just pure corruption. And he doesn't care. He's so blatant about it that he really doesn't care. And that's where I find that all of our politicians, for the most part, whether it be Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell or Trump or Obama or Biden, they're all corrupt, and they don't care that that they're corrupt. At least, one of the things that kept us from being a banana republic, as they're called, was that at least we had the dignity to hide our corruption. Now we've become we don't care.
Well, or like you were suggesting with Watergate, that in many times of our national history, not all, we hold ourselves to account. Which the real difference between what we claim to be a banana republic and ourselves is an adherence to the law in a neutral fashion. Like if I break the law, then I don't try to get out of that punishment because I know I broke the law. The law operates, in our minds in a way that's sacrosanct and independent. And then when we look at things, particularly in this time of heightened sense of not crisis as much as, I guess what I'm trying to say is the viewpoint of most people is already predisposed to not believe the other side. And to call out the other side on how I feel about it, rather than necessarily on any hard evidence. It's just, this is how I feel about it, ergo it must be true. And again, the larger point to the conversation about Civil War, what does a Civil War look like? I think that is exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, so you're right. And so my point of us getting to this point of Civil War is that we are dishonest as a whole. We are dishonest people. We have become so dishonest. Because what you were saying about, I used to have fast cars. When I was a kid, that I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't do drugs, didn't do any of that stuff. I just drove fast cars.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you how many times I got taken into. I had to go into the courtroom before the judge, and
really?
Because
what was your favorite car?
It was what real men drive. Do you ever read that book? Is called Real Men Don't Eat Quiche.
No.
It came out like I want to say in the 80s.
Vaguely think I remember it.
Yeah, and he said, and it says, "Real men drive Plymouth Furies."
Is that what you drove?
That's what I drove.
Oh, very nice.
And because it used to be an old state trooper's car, and so they had it like a top end over 165 miles an hour. Yeah. So anyway, so I just drove fast, and I paid so much money in tickets, and the judge knew me by first name, but not once did I ever go before him and say I didn't do this, because I did do it, and I was like, oh, I gotta, if I get caught, I gotta pay the dues. That's as they say, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. and so I've always been honest about it. Never once did I ever try to hide the fact that I did this. Yes, I know I'm stupid. Yes, I know it's going to cost me, because thank God I did it back in the 70s when it was like $50 a ticket instead of $500 a ticket. Because now it would have broke me. But see, that's not where we're at. We're not there to the point where even our leaders are dishonest.
Sure.
Our leaders are dishonest. The police are dishonest. The police lie to you constantly.
Okay.
And so then they wonder, why is there a divide between the people and the police? Because you're liars. You lie to people. You trample over their rights, and you don't care. You think you're justified, that the ends justifies the means, and then we have this divide in all these different areas because we don't trust one another.
Yeah, and imagine, back to your example of your personal story, if you literally, not just hypothetically, you literally thought the people who were applying the speed limit laws had gotten there dishonestly. Now, as a young person, maybe you would just whatever, but it for me, part of what's happened to us in this current great crisis is coming out of that postmodern stuff we've talked about before, where if nothing is true, and then you add in the layer of all of those people are evil, and those people cheated to be in power, or those people are all corrupt, right? Then not only do I think you're lying all the time, I'm not ever going to see what is or is not dishonest. I'm only going to see what's dishonest from my own point of view.
Right.
And again, back to the law, the whole reason all the images of justice is that she's blindfolded is that she's not looking at a personal point of view. She just is looking to the law. And that works as long as everyone can step way back and agree on common first principles, agree on common definitions. But we've lost all that. So, I mean, that's unique to this crisis moment. The fact that we're divided philosophically, and then calling into question all of our institutions, quite honestly. I mean, there's a crisis of belief in all institutions. You see it across the board, and we see it at Valencia all the time, and in the banking institution, and we all give them these fancy names like the pharmaceutical industry kind of a thing, the military-industrial complex, and I think higher education is that way. I mean, I'd like to think maybe libraries are still sort of trusted. I hope people can trust the librarian and go to the library.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, it's all because of that sense of the decreasing sense of willingness to work together, to agree to like a common set of rules. The sense of, you're not following the rules, why should I follow the rules? I don't know if I even trust that the rules are legitimate or fair, or maybe they're biased against me because of something about me.
Oftentimes there's rules that are written that are against the Constitution. Like for instance, for whatever reason, municipalities like City Hall and stuff, they decide, oh, well, we don't want you to record in here. Well, that's not your choice. You don't get to make that choice. The Constitution says that I can record in here. The Supreme Court's already ruled on it. So you can't make some arbitrary policy to overrule the law of the land. And yet they will arrest people for doing exactly that.
Which is a great illustration to secession. Not to jump us, we're fine where we are, but
and we need to get into the secession.
There are people who will say, "Oh, so nobody can secede against the law." That's like saying nobody can drive over the speed limit against the law.
Right.
It's like, no, people will do what they can do, whether that's in breaking the law or quote unquote enforcing the law. So if they want to say you can't record something until you're willing to take that to the Supreme Court and win a lawsuit that will cost you millions of dollars, they have the power because they have the power in that local moment, in that moment of wherever that altercation is happening. You don't win. And so that's where there's always the kind of, I guess, not idealistic, but just there's the what we believe should happen, and then there's on the ground what did happen.
Right.
And power, as you know, I mean, is an aspect of what can be enforced at that moment. Which is why, by the way, the founders were so, as they set this up. Remember, what we're talking about is an experiment. I know we forget that at year 245 or whatever we're at, 243 or something. But it's an experiment. And we say, what experiment? It's an experiment in can we self-govern? Because the idea initially, it's not this way anymore, I think we've all lost this, is that the government is us.
Right.
It's just one of us. And us meaning us regular folk. And we're all, quote unquote, regular folk. And we take turns doing stuff. And in taking turns, we don't screw anybody lest we get screwed later. And so we're all kind of doing it. And then again, the experiment and the idea of saying, well, can that really work? Because for the vast majority, 99, 98% of the years on all the continents, the answer has been no.
Right.
No,
and
we're
why,
not doing that.
And we talked about this as to why that is. Because it if you take the Pareto effect, if you will, and rule that 80% of the people are sheep. I mean, that's
exactly.
And
yeah.
they can't stand the fact that they have to govern themselves.
To be responsible.
They want someone else to be responsible for them. So then when you have people, I'll speak for myself. I'm sure, or at least I believe you're this way. But someone like myself who goes, no, I don't want you stepping over your bounds to tell me what I can and can't do. I want to be able to do what I want to do. I want to have the freedom to do the things that pertain to me as a person. And as long as I'm not harming anyone else, I'm not, taking rights away from someone else, then I should be able, whether that means using drugs or using alcohol, whatever it may be.
Right.
I should have that right. If I want to end my life, because for whatever, it doesn't even matter the reason. But if I'm in pain and I go, I don't want to live any longer. No one should be able to have the right to tell me I have to live because they value life to the extent that they think you should live in pain. Which
is the Lockean concept. So John Locke's position, which was where the Articles of Confederation left us, at least as best they could try to flesh it out for a nation. And that's really one of the big challenges here. Is when we think in the terms you just spoke of, can that idea work in any large-scale civic structure? And I mean large-scale, even a city of 32,000 like Winter Park, Florida. That's large.
Right.
So can that work in that setting? I think most of us would say, yeah, I think so. But what if you get to how big is Orlando now? Like 800,000, and the metro is like 3 million.
Right, something like that.
Which is more than we're here for the writing of the Constitution. Right. And so I think that's where the real challenge hits us. And it's interesting. I've told you, I've been reading a lot of John Adams' letters. I mean, early on, he's on the one hand lauding these ideas, and I would say the foremost constitutional thinker of his day. In what has gone before, how can we do it? And in the same breath, the same period of time writing letters going, I don't know if we're going to pull this off or not. I don't know. I see so much, and he kind of goes through a list of corruption or his opinion of people's showing less than quality action, like less than quality values towards him or towards others. So he's excited about trying it and at the same time fearful about trying it. He noted, I think I told you this in one of our early episodes, that this concept had been tried by both England and France, and neither one could do it for more than 12 years. And he was meaning the 12-year window was what the English had done in the Commonwealth. The French didn't even get 12 years. They got like 2 years before the terror broke out. And then, of course, they're electing a dictator. They're electing a daddy. A daddy to take care, to replace the king, who was our daddy. So now we got a new daddy. We claim he's one of us, but he still basically gets all this power and trappings and wealth and power that the rest of us don't have. And I can go about my business being normal. So, I just say all that because I still believe that we can do it. But the key element, and this is beyond the crisis or whether we're in civil war now or not. This is just in the broad scope of things. The key element is an internal, I would say spiritual, but certainly an internal sense of guided by value. And that shows up in the sense or the ability for a person to self-moderate, to self-discipline. In other words, when you were speeding if there was a part of your brain going, I'm having so much fun, this car is so fast, and I'm only going 100 and I could go 160. But there's this other part of your brain going, there could be danger. You might not, I mean, I doubt you drove, maybe you did, but I doubt you drove crazily around a lot of other people.
No.
You were on a 2-lane road. There's nobody around. Maybe it's a 4-lane road. There's a car over there, but I'm fine. I'm not going to hit anybody. So that's the part of your brain that is saying, be careful, self-moderate, right. Be in control. You may have even had in your car moments when you thought, oh, I am getting to the edge of where I am in control. And even though you're far faster than 55, everybody remember that? I can drive 55. You're far faster than you self-moderated and you said, okay, I'm going to back down just a little bit because I can feel I'm not holding on. I don't want to die.
Right. I knew the extent of my talents. I knew the extent of what my car was capable of doing.
Right.
Like I would never drive that fast in a front wheel drive car because it just can't handle what my car could handle. But the thing is like when you talk about values, and here we are, and I promise, guys, we're going to get to the secession part. But the thing I wanted to make was two things: what was the starting point, and what was the catalyst? Because to me, there's so many things that come into play. We could blame the media, we could blame religion, we could blame greed, capitalism. There's so many things that come into play as to why people feel justified in their behavior because of what they're driven by, and they're not driven by integrity. They're not driven by honor. They justify. Look, I could go into each area and talk about, whether it's about cops, whether it's about politicians, whether, it doesn't matter. They're corrupt. And because they justify, I have a brother who justified stealing cable because it was a victimless
system.
Crime.
Yeah.
It's a victimless crime.
Oh, okay.
But I remember 3 kids smoking pot out on the beach, and I smelled it from the station, and I go, someone's having fun. They went out there and read these kids the riot act. The kids were smart enough to dump it into the sand so you couldn't find it. But they acted like they had committed murder. Yeah. And I'm going, why are you being so hard on these kids? Yeah, I get they shouldn't be doing this. But you're going to act like this is the crime of the century. Yeah, in the meantime, you're watching HBO for free, because you paid your cable guy to hook you up, for free. Because back in the days, I guess that's how it was done. You give him $20 and he's like, here you go, you're free, you got it for free. And so I go, how do you justify that kind of thinking? And yet that's where our politicians are.
Yeah.
That's where our leaders are. That's where our police are. And that's where religion is, where it's like that's where the Supreme Court is. The Supreme Court, when there was change in the Supreme Court, it was to add liberties to people. This is taking liberties away from people.
I don't know if you can. I don't know if that's actually factually correct. I know it feels like that, but right. I think if we go back and start looking, I'm not so sure.
Well, if you go back to the Emancipation Proclamation with Lincoln, we know that was to free slaves.
But that's not a Supreme Court decision.
No, but that wasn't a Supreme Court decision. But there was. What did the Supreme Court rule on and back for that? I don't.
Yeah. When we talk about the Supreme Court, we can go deeper.
Right.
On
yeah,
that.
and that's why I didn't do it because I knew we weren't going to talk about them because I would get stuck on them. And even with FDR and in Social Security and saying that it was that it wasn't constitutionally legal, and FDR pushed back because again that was to help people. Roe v. Wade is and again I could be wrong, but it's the first one I feel as though it's taking rights away from people.
The 22 decision. You don't mean Roe v. 72.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You meant the 22 decision.
Yes, exactly. So,
which is not Roe v. Wade. I forget what it's called. But anyway. It's not a case. Some kind of case number.
Yeah. All right. So anyway,
we do know what we're talking about, everybody. I promise you.
Yeah, we do.
We prepared for something else, but there's so much happening. That's the things. There's so much happening right now. I mean, some of you may be going, Kurt, find another guest because I've seen this guy too many times. But I mean, there's a lot of things that are spiraling around, which again is part of why I'm like, I'm not sure I'm there, but in my head I'm going, I think we actually have already begun that fight. not we're walking towards that fight. Because the Great Crisis does not have to be civil war, but the division that occurs, I think it actually is at the point where that's what we can call. Again, I'm not going to go to the mat on that one because I'm still working in my own head if I think that's the best way to describe it, because it may be just too confusing and too conflating issues, and people will never get Lee and Grant marching around out of their brain.
Right.
But so
okay, so let's do this. So I wanted to find the starting point.
Yep.
Would we or could we agree that we're looking at right around the era of Reagan?
That's the unraveling.
Okay, that's the unraveling.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, we can agree.
Certainly
on that.
begin. You
Right.
get this. Something's not right. Something not going on, and
Right.
then it just starts. Then kind of go off the cliff.
Okay, so then can we point to one entity that is causing this? Can we say, is this the media? Is it?
I would say no.
Religion?
You could say media because you did already say media. I would say no.
I wouldn't say they're the only.
I
one.
think this is a part of the pattern, right? So this may sound like I am saying history is deterministic. What we've seen in these 500 years, almost 600 years now, is there just seems to be similar type things that occur in each one of the phases that then leads to, like I said, in the Great Awakening or Phase 2, what always happens is the beginnings of young people, because it's always young people who are in these Great Awakenings, spiritual awakenings, questioning what had been considered accepted before. I mean, we're not saying that's bad or whatever, right? That's always happened. It always happens then. It doesn't
Right.
happen before. It happens right then. And as they question it, the older people usually reject that. They're like, no, what are you talking about? You can't do that. So there's this tension that emerges in that moment amongst those people. And as you go along, what at least we've seen in our pattern is what comes connected to that is it goes from just questioning like values or statements or viewpoints into or moves towards how then should the civic structure be governed? Because that's where it always ends up. Like it always kind of works its way into what do we actually think is the proper governance of that. So it feels to me like as I study the pattern, it is almost unavoidable. And I know that sounds deterministic, so maybe I'm guilty, but it's in a sense of saying, it's like I'm never going to pick up weeds in my yard, but then I decide to plant flowers, and then later I go, oh, that's not supposed to be there. So even though I don't want to pick up weeds because picking up weeds is stupid, I am going to get that out because I've done this other thing, and it's almost like you didn't mean to start dealing with weeds, but you planted flowers. And so
Right.
now you've got this viewpoint of wanting to protect the flowers. And that's a poor example, but it's a sense of there has always been these things that happen that then lead down this divide. And what has never happened in any of these moments is, say, at the beginning of the unraveling, kind of, we all come to our senses and decide, hang on, we can talk this out. That part never happens.
Well, I think part of the reason it never happens is because, as they say, revolution is for the young, but the from what I've seen, whether it be, Hitler and the Nazi Party and coming in and taking control of Germany, or whether it's the Bolsheviks in Russia, or that you have young people who have this ideology. But they have a, from what I see, especially even in this country right now, they have a very vague understanding of things.
Oh yeah,
I mean they
want to make the world a better place.
Right. They think they know, and they don't know squat. They really don't. They don't.
And neither did I.
But here's the thing. But there are older people. Let's say the boomers, if you will, and there are certain boomers out there who are feeding their heads with stuff that to push their agenda, and using this younger generation to fight their battles because they're too old to fight them.
So if your readers are ever going to really dig into this, your listeners or your readers, I'm sorry, so the two books that Strauss and Howe wrote ought to be required reading, in my opinion. And the latter one's the one that really gets into the pattern. It's called fourth turning. But the one that preceded it was revolutionary, and it was called generations. And it talks about how the generations also fall into a pattern. From their point of view, and I happen to agree with their point of view, there's generational archetypes that repeat. And there's 4 of them, and they repeat. And they fall into a consistent pattern that is impacted by the events going on in the world. So as the world goes through these 4 stages of our country goes through these 4 stages of cycles, you can imagine you're a parent right now, and you've got a little 3, 4, 5-year-old, how you would feel about everything in the world. And imagine you were, in 1978 or 1958. The parent at that time would feel differently about what's happening in the world. And obviously in 58, we had the Cold War, we had nuclear stuff. So it was not like, everybody was just butterflies and rainbows.
Right.
But there was a positivity in the high that was different than the feelings in the time of the spiritual awakening, which was different than the time in the unraveling, different than the time in these last, say, 15, 20 years of the crisis, right? So in that feeling then, that impacts how parenting happens. And I feel like Strauss and Howe in particular have done a very masterful and compelling job of demonstrating that you then can also, because the layers of this are deep, that child rearing then moves in a pendulum from very permissive to very controlling. And the very controlling is in the time when it feels the most dangerous. So the time of great crisis. And the very permissive is at the time when things feel like really wonderful,
right.
Spiritual awakening. And then there's the 2 moments when it's sort of centered. But in this parenting issue, that then impacts the generation is. So to your point, in the book Generations, they talk a lot about how if you look at the old myth stories, and even at that time, this was written in like 97, but they use Star Wars as an example. Most of the mythic stories will have some pattern where key story members are of those 4 generational types of where you have at least you will have, like in Star Wars, you have the young Luke and Leia. So they're the young enthusiastic generation. And then you have the old, right, kind of guiding, which is Obi-Wan,
right.
Voice. And then you have the middle kind of swashbuckling power structure, Darth and Han Solo, right? And they all play like specific roles in telling the old mythical stories. And so for Strauss and Howe, and I'm compelled by this as well, that then does get to the point when you say, so the young will feel like they idealistically can see how the world could be a better place, but they're usually guided, shaped, led by someone. And you and I are roughly the same age. So see, we're Gen Xers. So our archetype is the nomad generation, right? So that generational archetype is usually the most unloved of the 4 that are born in the same 80-year cycle. It's the one that is raised in the most permissive time, although I could, different. Again, when you talk about any of this stuff, reminding your listeners, it's not on the kind of individualistic way. So any one of you listening could say, that's not my experience. Right. We're talking at the sweeping kind of galaxy level of within this archetype moment of these generational years, this is happening, even though there always is a minority position kind of thing. So, our generation is the General Grant generation. We're not the older generation of Lincoln, and we're not the soldiers who are marching in Gettysburg. We're the group we're Han Solo. We're Darth. We're
right.
in that position, that age bracket. I mean, Darth's not in charge. The Emperor's in charge. So the Emperor and Obi-Wan and Yoda are in that old crowd group, right? And then Darth's in this young place, kind of a middle age, kind of just get things done kind of stuff. And for Gen Xers, the nomad archetype, we got a high BS meter. We basically don't take crap from people. We'll say what we think. We're never going to be rich. We're not going to have more money than our parents, most of us. And the boomers hate us. The millennials hate us. And hate's too strong, but they deride us. You'll see this if you ever read about generations. You can see this subconsciously happening because they'll always squeeze our years. So it's like our years end up being, I've seen people say the Gen X generation is like 7 years. which when you do the generational study from a sociological point of view, like Strauss and Howe do, which is the school I'm with, every generation is roughly 20 years.
Right.
But it's like they don't want to admit that the old part, 63, 64, 65, they want to make them boomers because boomers are cool. And the youngest part, like 82, 83, 80, 45, they want to make them millennials because millennials are cool because Gen Xers suck. And it's like I have to fight sometimes with people like, dude, I'm a Gen Xer. Don't even go there with, But the point of that is just to say you're correct in that there is this generational thing that is also happening as we're kind of going along at this time.
Well, I appreciate your compliment, but I am a boomer. So,
are you older than me?
Oh yeah.
I don't think you're older than me. When were you born? You don't have to say. Oh, you are a boomer. Okay.
Yeah, so yeah.
Well, and you put up with me. Thank you very much.
No, because see, I don't.
That.
Here's the thing. It's like I know I am, but I don't look at the world through the eyes of a boomer.
Yeah,
I don't.
You're a young boomer,
right? Like I look at the. I like to believe that I think about other people than just myself.
Yeah.
Where a lot of boomers are just they're self-indulgent and they're like, I already did this and I already did that. I'm worried about me. So fortunately, not all of us are like that. I've met several boomers who are more open-minded and we do like the younger generations.
Yeah.
We can see the
Sure.
positive in these generations.
And a lot of people probably can too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so but too many boomers like to sit there and talk about, they're eating Tide Pods or something. I go, look, if we go back and look at the stupid crap we did,
absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, so the whole reason for this is that we were talking about the secession that Texas has been talking about, and they've been talking about it for quite some time, but it came back up again.
They put it in their So this was the part that keep going. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, this is the part that threw. I sent you this link. I'm like, did you see this? Because it's in the GOP, so the Republican Party platform. Now, I did some research today, and I found that it also is in the 2020 platform, and it could have been that it's in earlier iterations, and I didn't look to see. The article that I read was from NPR, which I basically trust NPR, and the implication was it was a new thing. So it's definitely not a new thing. At least it wasn't. There was one in 2020. I didn't do that much more research. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and the part that threw me was since at least Bush. So here's another point of why this is the time period for this. There have been active secession movements. When I looked at this for Bush, and I did do some basic research, but when I looked at this for Bush, there were some 30 states that had active secession movements. Now, all or most of those were like extremist groups, really small groups, groups nobody ever heard of. But the point being, in that state, there's a group saying this. Okay, in 2014, Reuters, roughly 25% of Americans wanted their state to secede. By the time you get to the last 2 years of Obama's presidency, Vermont, Hawaii, Texas under Obama, already talking about secession openly. After Brexit, they started using that cute little exit thing at the end. Yeah. So Hawaii, there's people who want to, release us as the kingdom that we got taken illegally. Vermont, New Hampshire, and then when when Trump was elected, California. So a Reuters poll in January 2017, 32% of Californians wanted to secede. In 2020, a Hofstra University poll, nearly 40% of voters in Texas. Oh, wait, shoot. I think this. No. This was across the country. They would support state secession in whatever state they lived in if their candidate, Trump or Biden, loses. In July 2021, University of Virginia poll, 41% of Democrats, so Biden supporters, 52% of Trump voters. So this is after the election, after we're already in, Biden's the president, were at least somewhat in agreement with the idea that, quote, it's time to split the country favoring red-blue states seceding from the Union. But again, the part that grabbed me when I sent you the link was that this was the actual political party saying it, not a group of yahoos just sort of starting. Some of these states, if you really dig into it, and that's fine, you're free entity, you can do what you want. Some group saying, hey, I live in Connecticut and we should secede, and you get fans and people support you and blah blah blah. Okay, whatever. This is like the political party,
right? Well, and here's the thing. So Republicans love love to remind people that Lincoln was a Republican.
Yes.
Now, mind you, the Republican Party is not even close to being what it was when Lincoln was a Republican. But here's a man who went to war over keeping the country together.
Preserve the
Do you
Union.
not see the hypocrisy in your
Or at least the irony.
the irony of it. I mean, seriously, like I just go, what is wrong with you people?
Yeah.
You talk out both sides of your mouth, and you have no idea what you stand for. You I don't even think that these people think it all the way through. Going, what does it look like? What if Texas did secede from the United States?
Yeah.
What does that
Well, so that's
entail?
what you said you wanted to talk about, was like, what does that look like?
Right.
Or how do we even get there, kind of a thing.
Right, and so one of the things that when I was talking to you about talking on this topic, I said, could it even be possible? And because obviously the U.S. military is, I don't care, even Texas being as the state that it is, and and being ruggedly independent and all this nonsense, they couldn't compete. If Biden said, okay, we're sending in the military, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
How does that
Which obviously is back to the point of, are we actually in a civil war, and in people's minds thinking in terms of armies marching, and then they go, there's no way we could be because of what you're proposing. Right. That in general terms, most people, I certainly would, realize there's no way an individual state on its own could compete on a straight up fight if the United States, if the president at the time, that's always, so there's, when you start really being hypothetical and you're just kind of imagine, kind of playing it in your head, you got to start laying out all the different factors that are involved. And there's several different factors that are involved here on both sides, from a sense of, would they get supported if they did it? Would they get opposed if they did it? Where's the people? What's the president? Who is the president? How's the president act? So on the base of your specific question, no, there's no way that a country would have a chance to do that. One of the things that people don't realize, or maybe they do realize, the country almost went to war in 1850 on civil war. So we win the war with Mexico, and it concludes in 48, and now we got all this land. And one of the big fights that was happening that ultimately contributed to the start of the war was, can a citizen take all their possessions into the new territorial lands? And of course, that meant taking my slaves. If I'm allowed to take my slaves, then that territorial land becomes slave territory, or where slavery is at least allowed. You got to back up to 1820 to see the Missouri Compromise, where Congress worked together, everybody worked together. This is in the time of the high, so we're all working together. And came up with what they thought was a fair conclusion of splitting the new land they had bought from France at that time. Turns out it wasn't split fairly. Of course, they didn't have GPS. So eventually, by 1850, the South ticked off. They're like, hey, we got screwed here. But the question being, can I as a citizen be told where I can or can't go? Well, by 1848, all the cards are on the table. And for Southern leaders, they're saying quite defiantly, we will fight you on this. There's a compromise that's made, which we'll have to get into the details, Compromise of 1850. And one of the things that many of the politicians who were in the moderate group at the time, both Democrats and Whigs, so that was two parties at the time, they stated, we have forestallen civil war. So it was seen that the war could begin then, and quite honestly, the war does begin 4 years later, not in 1861 like people begin. The Civil War really is first fought in Kansas. And that's a whole different conversation about our U.S. Civil War, which we don't have to go into. Right. But the point being, in 1850, all the southern states started training militias. Now go back to our gun conversation, you guys. Get the link and go back and watch our gun conversation. One of the aspects of what the amendment says is that it's about a well-trained militia. Well, okay, and every state had militias. We don't do this anymore. We have the National Guard, but we all think of that as like a separate arm of the military. Like none of us think about participating as citizens. But they did. But in the northern states, it was somewhat like we think about the National Guard today. It's kind of like, yeah, I do it, but, whatever. I mean, Canada's not going to invade us. But after 1850, the South took it very seriously, and they started training diligently, which is one of the reasons why the early year or two of the war was so pro-Southern on the battlefields, because they were a little bit better trained. So I say all that to say, in Texas, they're not going down that road yet. So there's no way they would win a fight with in just the sense of Texas by itself versus like the United States. If the president, so there's the ifs. If the president is willing to push the issue.
Okay, so let's talk about the president. Here we have a feckless president who I think
He said it.
I did. He is. He's a feckless president. It was stupid to vote for him, and I don't.
But
care.
he's been pretty strong on Russia. You kind of been begin to think maybe he would go out of it. I mean, he seems to be provoking, so maybe he would. Maybe he would fight it. I don't think he would. What's the first thing he would do? It would all be conversational.
Right, it would be.
In fact, on one of the websites of the Texas secession groups, or maybe this was actually a Republican in Texas, like a politician. It was a leader of an organization, but it was like, oh, we'll go to the courts.
Okay.
So that's where whether it's Vermont, Hawaii, or Texas, we're going to go have this conversation in court. I mean, they can, but historically, that's not where you're going to win or lose an actual secession. If you're banking on the court, you're going to have the same experience the Catalans have. You're going to have everybody going, yeah, we're not doing that.
Right.
Even if we agree with you, we're not doing that.
So here you have the leader of the Republican Party in Texas, Greg Abbott, who's the governor.
Well, I don't know if Greg Abbott was responsible for the platform.
No. That's what I'm saying.
sorry,
does he go? Does he even believe this? Does he go
who
along
knows?
with this?
Yeah.
You are the head honcho in
Right.
Texas.
Same question is being asked of Trump right now with January 6th. You're the head honcho.
Right, exactly. So it'd be interesting to see where he stands on this as well.
I haven't seen anything from him. But
Yeah.
you'd have to imagine that he's going to either help lead the party through the elections. I don't know if he's up for election in 20 or not as governor, but he's obviously going to, I assume, campaign as we would expect them to do. So he's campaigning on that platform unless he openly denounces the platform, which I don't think he would because it was at least in the 2020 platform.
Right. So here you have. I mean, who knows? Maybe he has lofty dreams of being the president of
Maybe he
of
does.
Texas.
Maybe he does. Well, let's go back to the military for a second, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the unasked questions or the next steps is, they'll lose, unless. What if a portion of the military secedes to join them?
Yeah, I don't see that happening, and I just because I think there are safety valves in the military to prevent that from happening. Now,
but it happened in 1860, 61.
But not having, even though I am a boomer, I wasn't around quite that. So I can't speak.
Somewhere
of the military.
between 20 and I thought it was closer to 40, but I read something today. It was a little not that high. So maybe somewhere between 20 and let's just say 30%, 35% of the officers who had direct commission renounced their commissions and went to their state. So two different factors make it different. One is it was 13 states or 11 states that went, not one. So there'd be a lot of people who are military officers today from whatever state in our country today who may agree with Texas, but they're not Texans.
Right.
So then they may not do anything. And then secondly, unlike 1860, we have a standing army. We have the largest military in the world, as you and I both know, and we have a very large standing army. At that time, we still held to the founders' belief that you should never have a standing army. So it was just what would each state create, and then what could Lincoln create as a quote-unquote army to kind of be the Union Army, as we talk about it. And that took time. I mean, Biden can snap his fingers and have missiles flying, and have helicopters going in. And, we're going to send in a Marine battalion to arrest Abbott or whoever else, and it could be over with in just a couple of quick days.
So, with the exception of, and I had raised this possibility to you, if Abbott went to China and spoke to what's his name, Jing?
I can never say it. I'm afraid to say it. I'll mess it up.
Okay.
We all know the leader of China. I'm not going to be the one who messes it up.
And said, hey, you support us, and then China has to, as we talked about, China has to decide, oh, this could be beneficial, but what are the chances of them pulling this off? And if we go in there, and so then you're looking at treason. Just the conversation is treasonous.
Yeah.
And once you go to that point, you really can't go back.
So I just read, literally an hour ago, was reading an article about treason. I agree with you. That'd be my statement. But this article was saying, and it was talking about Jeff Davis and Robert E. Lee, and it was looking backwards. And it was talking about how, in I think Eisenhower in the 50s and Carter in the 70s led the Congress to. So Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis were might have been the only two, but two of the very few Southern leaders who were not given their citizenship back. And then in hindsight, I'm pretty sure it's Eisenhower in the 50s and definitely Carter in the 70s with Jeff Davis. Obviously, after both men were dead, they did. I don't know what the right word would be. They gave them their citizenship back. Anyway, in this article was talking about this whole concept and noted that, and I'm not going to do it justice, so I apologize to whoever the author is, that having renounced their citizenship to become citizens of the Confederate States of America, technically their actions weren't treasonous anymore. And he went down the road of looking, you'd have to read the article, he went down the road of looking, so what I say to my students and just generally is that we missed a tremendous moment in the realm of civil rights and biracial relationships or multiracial relationships by not being more punitive at the end of the Civil War with Reconstruction.
Absolutely.
Okay? So this article was disagreeing with me and saying, why did Lincoln go the soft route and all this kind of stuff? But the article author was noting, and it was like a law page type of website, was noting that Jeff Davis was the only one who was technically arrested. So Lee was not arrested. He just wasn't given his citizenship back. Jeff Davis was arrested, and he was held in jail for a couple of years and then eventually just let go. And the article was arguing that part of why they let him go, this would be under Grant, I think, is when he was let go, was that the Attorney General and maybe Grant, some of the other leaders, besides the maybe potentially disruptive PR, thought we might lose because there's some legalese, like lawyers do, of whether or not he technically is a traitor or treasonous because he was not aiding and abetting a foreign country. He was working in the service of his country, the Confederate States of America.
But there was no Confederate State of America. I mean,
well, that's part of the whole debate,
right? Yeah. So, I mean, that's.
I actually would say there is a Confederate States of America, but that's the semantics that one deals with when they go through that. In the minds of the Texans, or go back to under Trump, the minds of the Californians, having declared themselves the California Republic, in their minds, they are now saying we are our own country, even if the president says, no, you're not. And so, that gets into, ultimately, the decision will be who wins. So years later, so we can say there's no Confederate States of America, and they never really was one because they lost. But had they won, we'd be living in one today. Well, you wouldn't be, I wouldn't be maybe, but you're saying the point. You get the point.
Right. Well, that's the thing.
Yeah, which gets to the how do you win?
The winner, the spoils go to the winner. So,
and they write the history. Victors write the history.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So
how do you win, though? You take a lesson from the American Revolution. So again, to make this point, the American Revolution was a civil war. Mm-hmm. And so as fighting a civil war, that's the whole point of the Declaration. We're about to celebrate. We're recording this on July 1st, so 4 days from now, although actually we should be celebrating it tomorrow, July 2nd, when it was voted and passed. The whole point of the Declaration was to say to the world, we have a legal right to the decision we're making. Okay, great. Now you got to win it on the battlefield. And how are you going to do that? And the only way they could see to do that, if England wouldn't just accept the legal right, which of course they wouldn't. Same thing we didn't expect. Lincoln didn't. And quite honestly, I don't think Biden or whoever else the next president would do it. Is to say we have to get help. We have to get some help from some other country that our opponent will be afraid of, or at least wary of. Because right now it's our opponent who's the superpower coming against us, and we're weaker. And we can say we have the courage of our convictions, and maybe everybody's going to try and fight, blah, 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 like Ukraine. But ultimately, you will lose. You will not win this battle. There's no way the American revolutionaries win the war with England just mano a mano.
Right.
Because they're the superpower. And so you have to say, well, who, like in today's world, who possibly would the United States have pause about before just saying, again, like I just said, sending the Marines or whatever? and China is on the short list. Maybe they're the only ones.
Right.
Others people might argue like Germany, Russia.
I don't see
But-
Germany doing like I don't Russia, yes, but
Well,
Russia's
don't think in terms of would they do it. Think in terms of would they cause the United States to be like pausing and kind of going, And I don't think Germany would. I think
No.
if Germany said
Yeah.
we're in, we agree with Texas or California. I think the United States is like, all right, fine, whatever. We beat you twice already. We'll do it a third time.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Russia, because of the nuclear bombs, causes a problem. But we've seen how feckless they are in this last experience with
Right.
Ukraine. I really think China's the only one. And
I do
even
too.
then, I'm not sure. Because, see, like we said about Putin, you can talk big until you've got to put all your cards on the table. And then, are you willing to put all your cards on the table? Are you willing to be national leader number 2 and drop atomic bombs?
right,
Are you not? Because if you're not, you're going to bluff and you're going to lose.
right,
Because in this case, in this example we're talking about, the United States would be fighting on its own soil for its own land, even though other people in the country had said, no, we're our own thing.
Right.
So China brings troops and drops them. They try and bring their aircraft carrier and roll it into the Gulf of Mexico. I see that you're here, but we're not going to accept that as something we're afraid of.
Now, I could be wrong. However, I don't believe I am. The only way that Texas stands a chance of seceding is through getting a superpower, if you will, to help them out, much like we did during the Revolutionary War. Because it's not, as you said, it doesn't stand a chance in the courts. If they think that they're going to take this to court and secede, it's not going to happen.
World court or our court.
Right, and
Yeah.
they don't have the manpower to fight against the U.S. military. I mean, especially when we're bigger than the next 10 militaries in the world. I don't know how they think they're going to, those yahoos are going to get their little rifles and their little pistols
Right.
and
Well, let's
Yahoo.
walk through that. Okay, so here's a couple of ways that it could go their way. And you've already said the first one, right? The president chooses not to fight. So he just says, we're going to talk about it. So years go by. There's no penalties whatsoever applied anywhere. No economic penalties, no travel penalties. The president just decides he's just going to not press the issue because he's afraid of what could unravel. All right. Well, then you kind of get into a de facto state. And depending on, of course, we'd have another election. It's not like we have one leader like Putin who could be there for 20 years. So then who's the next president? That'd be the next presidential election central point, right? What are you doing with Texas? So that's I don't think these are likely, but I'm just saying that's what are some ways we could say, well, maybe they could. Because if you give it de facto, it's possible that you may have a tremendous amount of people moving there, which then leads to the second one, as we noted earlier about the Confederacy. All of a sudden, what if New Mexico and Louisiana join them? What if New Mexico, Louisiana, and Arizona and Mississippi join them? What if the Gulf states all loop together?
And I would let them secede. I'd go, okay, you take on the welfare states, and you you take care of them.
Right. And so then that's reason number 3, right? Both in the what will happen, will they? It could go either direction here. Is what does the populace do? Now, on the one hand, we've talked about a highly irritated and seemingly highly animated populace. So from George Floyd rallies to both pro-Trump, pro-Biden stuff, the January 6th thing. So we could say, I don't know, there's people really ready to go at it, just like Kansas, Nebraska. I mean, that was just citizens going to war with each other with nobody around. Or, as I've often said, I think still believe to be the majority, we are so addicted to ease that I think a lot of people be like, I got a show on Netflix to watch. So I don't care. And that could impact both sides, right? So
Right.
if Texas are expecting people to move there and nobody wants to move there, or Biden wants to see a groundswell, and what he hears instead is either ambivalence or, like you just said, let them go. Well, if you're the president, do you say, okay, I'm going to go against public opinion and I'm going to fight, either physically or in the courts at least, to bring them back in, because we're not letting you go. If the majority of population, particularly your own voters, are kind of saying, screw them, let them go. So those are factors that are wild cards that nobody can predict.
Well, if they're willing to take on the welfare states, that we end up paying for, then let them have them. See how long they want to stay independent before they beg to come back in, so that they're not paying for them. Yeah. So I know that the act of just presenting secession isn't treasonous, but I would certainly have my eyes on those people and go, I need to keep an eye on you. Because
I'm sure the FBI knows every one of the 30 state groups that I told you about.
And here's the thing. What happens to people like you and I? For instance, we're so divided on every topic, but I really do my best to go, what is fair for everyone?
Sure, you're a very moderate person.
So I, even though I happen to be gay, I don't agree with everything that the gay community or the LGBTQ community gets behind.
Yeah.
Because I think most of them are 80% of them are just like 80% of Americans. They're just followers. They're afraid to step up and challenge anything because they don't want to be ostracized from their community.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many of them continue to laud Hillary Clinton, and I point out that she's corrupt, and I show them the corruption, and they ignore it, just like Trump support. They don't even realize that they are no different than the Trump supporters that they hate. That they go, how could Trump supporters be so stupid and support him when he's so corrupt? The same way you support Hillary and Pelosi. That's how, because you're blind to your own ignorance, or to what's going on your own side, because you don't want to see it. That's why.
Yeah.
So and then even when we talk about certain things like the trans rights, I'm all about trans rights, and I think the majority of the people, as has shown, they're all about people in trans rights. They're saying be who you want to be, but you can't take your rights or your liberties and trample on other people's. And so in the case of these trans females who want to participate in sports against biological females, which they have an extremely unfair advantage.
Absolutely.
And I don't care what kind of pseudoscience they come up with, it's never going to hold water, and that's why they won't debate anybody of any substance, because they know they'll get trampled, and they continue to get trampled. But they that doesn't stop them from pushing this false narrative. So here I am going, well, look, I want gay rights, I want trans rights, I want those things, but I also want us to be fair and go, biological women have rights too. Church-going people have rights too. I don't want to step over on their rights anymore, and I want them to step on mine.
Right.
So, I could see people going to Texas, going, "Yeah, this trans thing, I'm sick of it and tired of it, and tired of gay people. I'm going to Texas." But but then there's other things that were, you go, well, but I do like smoking my pot. Well, they're not going to let you smoke your pot in Texas, So where do you separate yourself from going, yeah, I want to move to Texas, or I want to move out of Texas?
In one sense, I kind of hope they do it just because I'm fascinated
to see what would happen. Yeah,
because
it would be an interesting.
Because that's what life is. Life is writing the history as we go along, that people like me get to look back at and then interpret, or at least to reflect on it and say, it's this. And we are alive in one of the most dynamic times I would say one of 3 or 4 most dynamic times in all of human history. And so there's a fascination, maybe a morbid fascination, but still you're sitting there going, oh, wow, I'd really love to see what happens, because you don't know what people would do, nor do you know what it would look like. Like, if Texas goes and Biden's like, okay, fine, whatever, and everybody else goes, fine, whatever. California used to make this thing, we'll be the 4th largest economy in the world. It's like, well, not unless you include the selling of stuff to the other 49 states.
Right.
You're not that, states that think I can be X independently are forgetting how much infrastructure is in context with the rest of the area. They act as if nothing would change except the name on the label. And it's like, oh, no, everything changes.
Exactly.
I mean, think about, we have water rights involving one of a couple rivers, I forget the name of it now, that involve us, Alabama, and it's for the Panhandle. It doesn't involve us down here in Central Florida. Right? It's a big deal, and when some of the big heavy drought stuff was happening about a decade ago, it got pretty dicey. It was all like legalese. There was discussions in law courts and whatever between the three states, and if Floridians were thinking about seceding, yeah, they would act in that example like it's no big deal, right? We'd still have those conversations. And maybe we would have those conversations, but at that point, you're now two nations discussing something.
Right.
And you may find that the nation you're dealing with, the one you screwed at and said, hey, screw you, we're out, decides they don't want to deal with you.
Right.
Right. And they turn off the water. Right. And you say, well, that can't turn off the water. Well, they probably could in some way divert water so the Panhandle all of a sudden doesn't have water. And and I just use that as a simple example. You can raise a whole bunch of other examples, that it's not as simple as thinking it's just changing the label.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, you're right. We could shut off water to them. We could shut off many things to them. And we could also make it that Ted Cruz can't leave Texas. He's not allowed in any of the other states. Well, and
you raised this when we were talking, and I think it's a good point, is that as we've seen with other states, other nations, we use economic pressure.
Right.
And so you could say that, or at least challenge, say, the air flight industry to say, like Americans usually is based out of there, but a lot of people have bases, some of their what they call bases in like Dallas, Fort Worth, or down in Houston, and it's like, well, you can't fly out of there anymore, not to our country.
Right.
And so now if you're Southwest, now if you're Delta, what do you decide there? How do you play that out? We don't know the answer to how they'd play that out. But it's something that when people are figuring out, filling out, GOP or Democrat, whatever, hey, I want to have a secession. It's like, you need to think this through.
Right.
It's not as simple as you think it is.
That's the thing. It's like we could stop them from flying into our airspace. We don't want them in our airspace because, I'm sure they have some billionaires in Texas go, oh, well, I'll start my own airline. Well, good. You fly back forth through, Austin to Houston or whatever, but you're not flying in our airspace. Yeah, we may not let you
fly here. Or like we did with the Russians, shut them out of the banking system.
Right. And what are you going to do? When we do that to you, you don't have an army to fight against us. You're going to take it like a little bitch. That's what you're going to do. You're going to take it like a little bitch, and all of a sudden, you're not the big bad Texans you all thought you were.
Well, now there's a whole bunch. So here's another layer, right? People will tell us that we're not the most popular country in the world.
We're not.
Right? So that you never know that there could be some groundswell of support for anything that does harm to the United States. Not that they agree with Texas, or to use the other example we would say in California, but just in a sense of, oh, this hurts the United States, those arrogant SOBs. Oh, okay, yeah, we will. We'll help them. We'll help these guys in some way. With that, maybe an alliance. I'm just saying that's a plausible possibility.
Yeah, but I see that happening just like Russia helped Cuba. Where's Cuba at?
Yeah, it didn't work out for them. Right?
Exactly. And I personally believe, and again, and I have to take this back. I'm being arrogant towards those people like Ted Cruz, who's not even a real Texan but pretends he is. It's their arrogance, and so I'm giving arrogance back. I love Texans. I know plenty of people. I was just out there, had a great time, even though it was hot as hell. But
so this is another one of the levels that I think you and I talked about before. In 1860 or 1850, as we were going into the philosophical divide, I think it would be fair to say that probably, 80% of the people living in the southern region agreed with they were on one side. There was a minority view, and in Tennessee and in Virginia and North Carolina, they voted against secession the first time. There's 2 votes for secession, and that they didn't. So the government of the Constitution for the Confederacy was written with the Deep South, but not with Tennessee, not with Arkansas. They voted against it. They said, we're not seceding. That they seceded after Fort Sumter. Different conversation. So there probably was, in the whole of the population of the South, 20, maybe 25, but it was a large number who were unified in viewpoint. When you look at our country today, and we call states red and blue, but I would say, and I'm not a political scientist, I call foul on all those. I think the whole country's purple, because you have a large percentage of people who are on the losing side of elections. So yes, California has voted Democrat for a very long time, right? But California is huge, by the way, numerically. Right. there's a very large number of California Republicans.
Oh, we know that.
Right?
We saw that.
Vermont,
right.
New York, Florida. So the idea that there would be a unified stance in Texas, it seems implausible to me.
It is, because here's the thing, because I know what they think. They think, oh, well, here's what's going to happen. We'll have all these Christians. We'll have all these Republicans. We'll have all these, Second Amendment
right.
activists.
We've got our guns.
We got our
fight.
guns, or we got our God. We're good to go.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, is you and I both know, and I've said this for many years. I don't care. When there was this whole nonsense, there were people go, oh, if blacks would just go back to Africa, everything would be great. No, it wouldn't, because we would find we'll always find a reason to fight. All you have to do is look to Ireland. You can see, the entire country is white, and they still have, we're fighting amongst each other. We will, whether it's the North against the South, East against the West, whether it's Baptists against Catholics, or Protestants or Presbyterians, or Texas could have all these Christians and then say, oh yeah, but the Baptist church is more right than the Presbyterian church, and so or any number of reasons that they would fight within themselves. So what are they going to do? Are they going to break up those tribes into counties now? Like if you're a Presbyterian, you can only live over in Houston, or if you're Baptist, you got to live in Austin, or
this is where the whole conversation about back to governance at the philosophical level. So the states' rights argument, it doesn't fall apart, but you can question it deeply when you just recognize that. So the states' right argument typically is the government, far away from us, makes decisions that we don't feel are in our best interest, and we should make them locally. We talked about this before, local governance. But that same thing applies within a geographical space that we call a state. So think of Georgia or Iowa or whatever, that at every level you can end up, where you end up going is to Rousseau, which is in essence saying we should have an anarchy-based styled system, not an anarchy not being bad, but just that there's no rules, because we don't need the rules. We leave each other alone. So Locke can be devolved, which is what I think Rousseau does. Because if you say, well, it needs to be local, it's like, well, how local? And ultimately you end up with, I rule for myself, which is fine. That's an okay way to do things. It's Rousseauian. And I don't think it actually will work as well as people would think it would work.
No, because then you have these small municipalities that would,
So then you end up in the place where the Greeks were, the Romans were, where you are in a geographically constrained space, and you still have the equivalent of nations. And so, the Epicureans and the Romans don't like each other, or the Romans and the Latins don't like each other, or the Spartans and, and the Athenians don't like each other, the Corinthians don't like the Thebians. And so you still... If Texas snapped its finger and it just happened to be a new republic, like they're still going to have issues where people living in Texas are going to feel like the government's making decisions that they don't like because they don't agree with them, because we never ever are in a place where it's a unified sense of living. So I guess I'm just saying that just to agree with you that I think there'd be issues if they could get to a place where day one, hey, we're all unified. I don't think they'll ever get to a place day one we're all unified, because Texas also has a large number of people living there, and a significant portion of them they're not Republicans, or if they are Republicans, they wouldn't support secession anyway. So again, unlike 1861, where in some states you did have unanimous support or near unanimous support, I don't think that would exist anywhere in the United States today, any single state, not even in Hawaii, where they can say, well, we were a kingdom, we were screwed. Yeah, but you can also have a bunch of Howleys who live out there, and they've lived there for 3 generations, and they consider themselves, native to some degree Hawaiians, and they may not agree with being a kingdom of Hawaii.
Right.
You see this in Puerto Rico all the time. Puerto Rico is still fighting because they fight amongst themselves. With the one political party in Puerto Rico, not Republican, Democrat, one party wants to be independent. One party wants to stay and be a territory. One party wants to become a state. And so, the U.S. Congress is kind of like, y'all need to make up your mind. Well, they can't make up their mind because they're deeply divided.
Well, not only that, because there's those who have and those who have not.
That's true. The economic piece gets in there as well.
Yeah. So, if I happen to be doing well under this system, and I live in Puerto Rico and I'm a multimillionaire and I'm banking money, I don't want things to change.
Right.
And so and I also have the money to put towards not changing and fighting that battle to
Sure.
keep us as
and
status quo.
every election they have goes down that road of
Right.
what is within Puerto Rican voting for both state and the people that they send to D.C. I think largely it goes down that road of not Republican Democrat, but which is the viewpoint. So and they keep, like every place else, kind of go back and forth. And one moment they want this, and one moment more people want that, and it's not clear that there's not 100% of Hawaiians who are saying we should be an independent kingdom. If there were to be a different story, same
Right.
with Texas, same with California. That's not the case. But this then all is back to the point of I don't think we would see a civil war like we're talking about, but we will see the continuation of the tension that we have till we get to resolution of the great crisis, because there has to be if the pattern holds, there has to be resolution that comes on the other side, that the vast majority goes, okay, we all agree to X. This is the thing we've all agreed to,
Right.
and what it's going to look like. And I again, whether or not I am going to say more openly, publicly, consistently, we are in a civil war, I'm not sure, but we certainly are in this state of the open animosity and the open sense of vitriol has reached that pitch level that we're far past the point of having reasoned people sit down together and come to some logical conclusion based on moderation and compromise.
Because I think they think that the only compromise is getting their way completely.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so here's I think you just hit on a very important point. Because we have these thoughts of, like, well, I know it could solve our problem. We secede from the United States and our problems are solved. But they don't think it all the way through because, right, as we just stated, and the problems that would arise, it's not even occurring to them because they're not thinking deep enough to go, what's this look like? All they see is, oh yeah, we don't have to put up with this, we don't have to put up with that. Correct. And life will be grand. And it's like, no, it won't be. And if you really thought it through, I think what you would come to is the conclusion that, hey, this isn't, on the surface, yeah, it looks like a great idea in theory, but when you put it into practice, probably not so much, and you think that you're going to form this utopia. Well, as we all know, there's no such thing as utopia, because your idea, you and I think we would be great neighbors, and I think that we would be as great of friends as any two people could be. Sure. because of the respect that we have for one another. But my utopia is going to look completely different from your utopia.
Very much so.
And
and every attempt in history to make a utopia on Earth has been a disaster.
Right, exactly.
It's been a disaster.
And if Texas thinks, oh, we'll just get all like-minded people together and we'll just have a big old party and a barbecue it's not going to work that way. And if you actually put some real thought into it, instead of just spewing out this rhetoric that sounds good to the base, then you wouldn't even think about it. Like, you wouldn't even bring this up. You'd go, this is just a stupid idea. But unfortunately, most of our politicians don't want it.
I wonder if they're just out of good ideas. Because I've conceded to you before on this show with your audience.
I don't think they're out of good ideas. I think they're just so corrupt that they're in it to make money for themselves.
That's possible.
And that, I don't.
Yeah, but then how are you going to end that? You're not going to end that.
Yes, you are. And this is how you end
Okay,
it.
go ahead.
You, as Bernie Sanders said, we get money out of politics.
But
that is the.
You're never going to get them to agree to that.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
And this is, and I disagree with that. I think you can. And here's how you do it. You vote for somebody. I promise you, if I don't care who the candidate is, if there's only one candidate and he says, my main goal is to get money out of politics, I'm voting for that person.
But you've already established that there's not anybody running like that.
Okay, but Bernie Sanders is running like that.
And his own party
but here's the problem.
Treated him terribly.
Right. They in fact,
and
then they colluded.
And then those party members voted for Hillary.
Okay, and so this is where we need. Is there an awakening in part of this?
We've already gone through it. Unfortunately, no.
Oh man! So when's the next awakening?
It's after. It's after. That's the problem.
Great.
It's after. I make. You're talking about Bernie. I'll be as critical as I've been before about Republicans and some of my Christian friends. I said to some of my Christian friends in 2016, how in the world can you vote for that man? And they did the same thing, same mental gymnastics that your friends voted, saying about, I was a no Bernie supporter should have ever voted for Hillary, but they talked themselves into it.
Well,
and some of the people who were running in the 2016 primary for the Republicans, in my opinion, were decent people and who had some good thoughts on the table, right? Just like in the 2020 election, there were some really good people, in my opinion, who were running for the Democratic. I would not have voted for Bernie if I had been a Democrat in the primary system. A couple other people I thought I liked the way this person's thinking, and yet once they lost, and these people were not just slightly askew from Trump or slightly askew from Biden. They were way over here with what I thought were logical and good thoughts. Right. All the supporters were over here, and you're just like, oh my gosh. If there was ever a moment for a third party to emerge in our modern history, it was 2016.
Right.
And it didn't happen because of the money, the powerful groups like you're talking about. There.
Because the Republicans and Democrats will get in bed with each other to make sure
all the time.
There's no third group started.
All the time.
They don't want. Look, they're already sharing the money and the power. They don't want to share it with a third party. They don't.
But this is why I'm saying to you, I don't see it. I mean, you're right. Logically, that would make sense. But then logically, you have to have people who are willing to see all those steps you and I just said.
And in order for that to happen, there has to be an awakening of the people in this country to quit buying into the bullshit that's being fed them. The people who support Trump, the people who support Hillary, the people who support McConnell, the people who support Pelosi, you're all full of it. They're corrupt, and they're all laughing. I promise you, these people party together.
And there are people that run, I won't say in most elections, from local on up, there are people who are not, at least at the moment that they're running, ensconced in the system. Support those people.
Right.
Support those people. If we would do that, then you could at least start seeing a groundswell.
And that's the thing. Had we voted for Bernie, and had we started voting for Democrats who weren't part of the system, who wouldn't take corporate money, vote for them, then the next thing you know, you would start having Democrats in the Senate and in the House who would support Bernie. And so, yeah, you're right. One man alone can't do it. But Bernie was willing to call out those people to say, look, you don't get on board, I'm going to make sure that everyone knows that you're corrupt.
His election would have been another one of those moments you're like, I would have loved to have seen it.
I would have too. But people wanted it. But the people wanted it. We saw that with the Republicans. We watched Trump run through the best of the Republican Party, and he just trampled them.
Because he was an outsider in their minds.
And people in this country wanted something different.
Yeah.
So what did the Democrats do? We had Bernie Sanders. So we have Hillary and Debbie Wasserman Schultz collude.
Yep.
And we know this happened.
Yep.
We saw the emails between them that they stole this from the nomination from him.
They did.
And then you still have Democrats today going, oh, Hillary's so great. She is... man. And so, you know what? And I say this, and I mean this with all my heart. You people, you got the leaders that you deserve.
Yeah, we do.
Because you voted for them, and you ignored the facts about them because because you didn't want to see the corruption because it was on your side. So don't whine about how things are the way they are when you voted for Biden, when you voted for Hillary, when you voted for Trump, when you voted for any of these people that are corrupt, and they've been exposed, and you ignore the facts, and you still vote for them. So
any of your listeners, I just urge you, if you agree with what we're saying, to begin the process of slowly, gently, consistently say this to your neighbors, say this to your friends, to your circle. The only way we get this message across is to convince voters that they do not have to bow down to either political party, and they don't have to live in fear. Oh, if I vote third party, then the other guy's going to win. It's like
that's such a crock,
and it's a fear. It's a fear game.
It is.
It's like don't believe that, because there's enough. Again, there's enough of us, right? It's not like Bernie had 5%. It's not like some of the other groups that Trump was running against had 5% and he had 95%. It's like no, But they just it's so frustrating, because I do feel like that would be that would be the step that could potentially help us navigate out. But
you're
see.
saying so how long do we have to wait for the new awakening?
So a lot of it goes back to when one says, okay, so fourth turning, the fourth phase did begin here, and we're too close to see it. I will, like, if I had to put a card on the table right now, I would say it's somewhere between 7 and 10. So let's say 7 for the early side. And then if you stick with 20-ish, then the Great Crisis ends in 2027. Does that make sense? So
okay.
the fourth phase,
All right.
20-ish years. So if we say it's 07, then 2027. Again, this is ish, meaning it can be shorter or longer, right? The next 20 years is considered the high. Everybody's happy. We've squashed the bad guys. We've changed things the way we want it changed. So you have to imagine between now and 2027, something happens that gets to, an Appomattox moment, an end of fascism moment, of the king, the Peace of Paris in 1783 moment, and everybody's like, yay, cool, we won, ta-da, right? And I know there's lots of, wait, what? How do we do that? Let's just say we did, right? So that everybody's happy. So the next spiritual awakening is 20 years after that. So if we were being hard math, 27, 47. So somewhere 47. Yeah, that's what. So my Christian friends are the same way. We just need a spiritual awakening. I'm like, we had ours. It was the 60s. They're like, what? That is a spiritual awakening? It's the fourth spiritual awakening. It's the first one that was not exclusively Christian, but it was a spiritual awakening. All the trappings, all the markings,
right.
all the things that you, when you compare the spiritual awakenings. So it's our spiritual awakening. So if you want to go from there, you say the same thing. So, okay, so it's not 60, but if you just say, 1960 plus 80, 2040. So it's at least somewhere between 2040 and probably 2055 before the next. And again, this is always with assuming the pattern holds.
Right.
There are, and I say in my little book, because I think it's important. It is useful to say. I'm going to pull it out.
I was going to say, I want you to show.
If you want to get it, you can get it on Amazon. It's called "Tracking the Storm: Uncovering the Pattern to Great Crisis." I wrote it in 2010, and in 2011 is when I put it out privately. And in it, I talked about we'll know if this is going to continue this pattern by 2020. So I kind of feel kind of good because I said what was, and it worked out that way. And the pandemic was that final moment. That is the beginning of, within the fourth turning, there's a narrow explosion, right? So the Great Awakening, the Great Crisis is basic for the first, in the Revolutionary period is say 1765 to 1785, but the war is only 76 to 81. Right. Same thing, 1852, 55, depending on who's calling it, through 1877. Right. But the war is 61 to 65.
Right.
Right. So there's the explosive time. Then there's still years around it that kind of roll out, and you have to dig into it and this kind of a thing. But so my Christian friends are like, we need a Great Awakening. I'm like, dude, that's a long way off. That's a 25, 30 year window before that happens. And they're like, oh, Jesus, come back quickly. I mean, yes, I want Jesus to come back quickly in that sense of my understanding of some spiritual dimension stuff. But when we're thinking about like fixing the country, today's the day. You have to do work today. You have to say, I want this today. And you have to be more moderate and more willing to listen to your friends and more willing to engage people who don't agree on a lot on issues. And if we're going to change the pattern so that we get to the end without death and explosion, which I'd love to be wrong. I said this a couple of times in here. I sure hope I'm wrong, about some things. But
so basically the awakening that will come in
2045.
2045.
Yeah, something
okay.
like that.
We're planting the seed now that we're growing so that the awakening can happen.
Sure.
That,
But the thing that you're really wanting actually could happen now. It's just I don't see how it happens now without something horrific to get us there.
Well,
in other words, right. And I think that we're, again, no one can be prophetic, right? And say, oh, da-da-da-da-da. Like this is definitely going to happen. And we've said on here a couple of times, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but, is the country screwed kind of thing. It's like, maybe, but then maybe that's okay because one, we lived through it almost all the time. Yes, there was so many deaths in Civil War, Revolutionary War, but the bulk of us, the 95% of us will live through it. You may not like what it looks on the other side, and you may be the group that then leaves because you may go, this sucks, I'm out of here. and you may be like the loyalists who have to leave, or like the people who supported the king in the 1680s and leave or live quietly, like Robert E. Lee. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and not say anything and know that I lost. And okay, that's a possibility also. So you may not like it, but we lived through it. But then, maybe on the other side, we see some of the things that we're talking about take hold, right? Maybe on the other side, there is what the crisis leads us to the point where everybody says, yeah, big money out of this. Or even to the point of even calling into question some of our currently held views about, well, how many people should be actually voting? Is voting for everybody really a good idea if they're not really invested, not really alert? Do we need to have one president? Maybe we do need to see, this is radical. Maybe the country, North America, needs to be 6 countries. Agreed upon 6 countries, done logically, kind of worked its way out, and yeah, they have different flavors. I don't know, and no one can predict those things, but I'm not afraid of like it's just going to burn my house down, and I'm just going to have a burned down house. But it's like I would say there's a lot of things in the world that I see our country today to which I go, I don't like that. If I don't like it, then you know what? I don't really want to preserve it.
Right.
I'm not trying to say, hey, let's go out and revolutionize and burn things down and be in the street marching, although we might need to. But it's like, if somebody says, oh, but going down the road you're talking about, Carl, it's all going to burn down. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm okay with that.
Right.
Because there's a lot of stuff going on that I don't like anymore. Now, some of the things I don't like, you may love, or we may not agree on how much the levels are and that kind of thing. And that's part of, again, in a civic society, how do we work together? Anyway, I'm interested to see how it's all going to work out.
Might want to do what I might do, which is take a vacation until 2045. And then I'll check back on and see. I'll be over in Switzerland saying, okay, is it time to come back?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that may be part of the deal. There may be a lot of people who do stuff like that. We would not be the first people who have to do that.
Well, one of the things I think that will help us is the knowledge. This is what's so great about history, is that if we can learn from it, we can change how the outcome will be for the future.
I believe that.
I think that your book here, Tracking the Storm, Uncovering the Pattern to Great Crisis, you want to know what has happened in the past and how it's happened and what we can expect in the future. Having that knowledge is just extremely valuable and can help us to get to that point to where, like you said, we can start talking to our neighbors. We can start talking to one another instead of just fighting because we don't agree on certain things.
Correct.
And that's how we're going to get to that awakening. We're not going to get there, well, we will, but the hard way, by fighting with one another. And wouldn't it be nice if we could skip the whole horrific part and just get to the awakening?
Yeah.
And I think that's possible if people would just let their egos go and wake the hell up and quit buying into the nonsense that's being fed to them, and by the powers that be, and whatever they may look like. But
and in the meantime, we'll keep telling truth and speaking messages of hope and instruction and education, and try to help a few people awaken.
All right, so one last thing. If Texas attempted to secede, what do you think that would look like? And I know we kind of talked about it, but just like in a brief sentence or two, does it work? Does it not work? Do they regret it? Do they regret it and stick by their because they're too proud to admit they messed up? So
it's really too hard to call because of all the factors. I would say the odds would be strongly against it for all the reasons that we've listed out. There's not enough positive reasons that I think that seem obvious. Like it's a stretch. China could help them right off the bat. That seems like a stretch that would be in China's best interest. I don't see that. The people could en masse, just thousands of people leave their state and move to Texas. So the numbers,
I can see thousands leaving Texas too.
There could be a large number of military people who, to our surprise, takes their ship and their plane and their tank and drives to Texas and say, we're on your side. There could be, but it seems like a huge Like if I was playing in a video game, there's no way I'm picking that path.
Right.
Because all the factors are stacked. You'd have to have a lot of things go. The president would have to be soft. The military would have to be divided. The people would have to be, willing to get busy as opposed to just being luxurious and hanging out simplified. I don't think in our current setting that's plausible.
If you just made it so Netflix couldn't get into Texas, they probably stopped right.
Maybe so, man. Maybe so.
Well, this was a fun conversation.
Your friends are going to, every time your fans are going to get on this, wait, he's talking to that guy. I'm not listening. I'm like, please listen for Kurt's sake.
No,
please listen.
Please listen for your sake and for all of our sake, because especially if you happen to be a Republican from Texas, think this thing through before think it all the way through.
Absolutely.
And realize that it might not be such the panacea you think it's going to be. So anyway,
there we
Carl,
go.
Thank you so much again.
Absolutely.
And I know we're going to talk about SCOTUS. If I can get him back in here, that's coming. So, but thank you again. As always, I loved it. Had a great time with you, and I really appreciate your input. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, friends. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, wake up. And I don't mean be woke. I mean wake up. And love yourself so you can love others. Bye.